everyone, welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. It is April and it is not warm where I am. I'm not sure if it's warm where you are, Rebecca, or not, but I'm really wishing the warm weather would come. I am happy today to have Rebecca Schneider with me. She's the co-founder of AvenueCX, which is an enterprise content strategy consultancy. Her areas of expertise, content strategy, taxonomy development, and structured content. She has guided content strategy in a variety of industries, automotive, semiconductor, telecommunications, retail, financial services. Lots of really interesting industries, I suspect, to work with. Rebecca just presented at Convex Minneapolis this past weekend on the very topic that we're actually going to talk about today. So I'm very happy to have her here. Thanks for joining us, Rebecca.
Glad to be here.
I put a post on LinkedIn when I was today when I said, if you'd have asked me, not even a month ago, maybe a couple of months ago, if you really needed structured content and taxonomies and all that stuff now that we have this great generative AI and all these large language models, I would have said no, probably not. But I think you're going to prove me wrong. So I really think this is going to be very interesting to hear.
Yeah. So I'll happily talk to you for hours about this topic, but we don't have that long.
No. All right. So let's kind of start at the beginning. Explain to me what category design is and why it's important for companies in the first place. And, what are kind of the key elements of good category design?
So category design is essentially creating, at its most basic, is to create categories for your stuff, right? We all have stuff. Everybody has stuff. The idea is to put them in categories or buckets that make sense to your users, not how your organization is internally organized, but using the terms and labels that make sense for your users and your customers. Because it's not on them to understand how your internal organization works or what internal names you have for things. They might not even know what branded items you're promoting a certain branded set of products. They're interested in the product itself, and they may be interested in the brand, but they still have to be able to find it, even though they don't know what the brand name is.
Right.
So the idea is that when you're creating categories, they should be relevant to your users. I mean, if you call something internally something different, that's totally fine. But you want to use labels that make sense, that are short, ideally below 35 characters or so, because people scan. You don't want them to read. You want them to scan and find something quickly, right? You want to use concrete nouns. So, what exactly is something? And also, you want to stay away from any sort of thing that intuits other, miscellaneous, specialty, special purpose. All of these kind of vague terms are your kitchen drawer, right? You know what's in your kitchen junk drawer. I know what's in my kitchen junk drawer, but nobody else knows what's in my kitchen junk drawer. And when you call something a category called other, that's your kitchen junk drawer.
Right.
And if users can't find or customers can't find what they're looking for, they're not going to buy your product. So you really have to put yourself in the position of your users, your customers, how they think about things, what labels they use, and to make sure that you're using something that resonates with them and not how you refer to it internally or how you're organized, within the overall organizational structure of your company. All of these things in order to be able to classify things to these buckets so people can find things.
Is that something most companies kind of commonly do? create a taxonomy that's internally oriented, and they don't do that work to go out and
Oh,
create
yeah.
one that's externally
Yes.
oriented?
Yes. Yes. I've even had a client tell me, "Well, they're just gonna really have to learn to understand our language." I'm like, "No, no, you
Wow.
need to speak their language." Yeah, so it's and part of the struggle, and it's become less so these days, is that people think, "Oh, I'll just create a bunch of categories, it'll be fine." Yeah, and then it either grows over time or it's inappropriate, it's not properly maintained or governed, you know, and you have literally chaos. Or you'll have people put one category in multiple places, which is called polyhierarchy. Well, you never know, they might look for it there, so let's just put the category there, which creates more confusion more than anything else, to be honest.
I can
Uh,
imagine.
yes.
So where do you use these taxonomies? In search, obviously, is a one particular example.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. In search, in filtering, you can also use it for, marketing purposes, like for campaigns. You can use it for, uh, you know, reporting. You can use internal reporting, external reporting. You can use it for personalization. It's often used for that. And you can also use it for augmenting AI applications as well.
Right. Okay. So that's interesting. You said about marketing and personalization, and I guess I didn't really think of it that I've always kind of thought about taxonomies and structured content more on technical documentation side.
Yes. Yeah,
And everybody,
absolutely.
but there's the conversation that there is overflow, that there is a relationship between marketing content and technical documentation content, and they should use the same taxonomies, right?
Yes, ideally, yes. And there might be certain aspects of a taxonomy that are more appropriate for technical documentation. And as for example, you may have audiences at a broad level for marketing, right? But for technical documentation, you would want to have more detailed audiences for, defined for your documentation to make sure you're hitting, okay, is this a beginning user? Is this an expert? Is this a partner who lives and breathes this stuff every day? Things like that. So you would probably get more granular in some cases for technical documentation and less so for marketing.
Yeah.
Sometimes that might be, switched around a little bit. But yes, but they should still be using the same language in the technical documentation as they are in the marketing. Now, marketing might have a different voice and tone, but they still should be using similar or ideally the same language. So you're not creating a jarring user experience when they're going through the marketing stuff. And now I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. Let me take a look at the technical specifications of this doohickey, right? And so they go look at this, and they're using entirely different verbiage and language
Hmm.
in the technical documentation. It's like, is this the same thing? I don't know. And you confuse people.
Yeah. How do you get a company to kind of think holistically about their content?
It's uh it, it's an education process. Everything I go through typically with a client is an education process. A lot of times the clients know that they're siloed. They know that they have these different enclaves of content throughout their organization, whether it be for sales enablement or marketing or e-commerce and those sorts of things. And they know this, but they're not exactly quite sure how to get there.
Mm,
That's a lot of what I do. I mean, half of it is sort of admitting you have a problem and then trying to figure out how best to resolve it.
yeah. Sounds like fun and maybe frustrating at sometimes at the
It
same time.
it requires a lot of patience because particularly for larger companies that have organically grown over time, um, how they talked about things 50 years ago is different than how they talk about things today.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of life, right? There's also a lot of when you're thinking about it, that the personalities and the politics involved also plays into it. And so you have to, one, be super patient, and again, educate, and essentially start at one corner and work your way out. These full-blown, oh, we're going to align everything and everybody's going to hold hands and sing kumbaya, that rarely works.
Yeah.
You have to start small and just grow and push out, because these large implementations where you're trying to bring in 15 separate systems to talk the same way and all this kind of stuff invariably either fail or don't do terribly well.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And I suspect now that generative AI has come into the picture, that there are people or companies overall that are saying, I don't even need taxonomy and metadata anymore. So when you hear that, what do you say?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
So you're taking structured content, unstructured content, putting it into a large language model, and you're hoping to get brilliance out. And that's not it. It'll work. You can you do it? Absolutely. Can you take and throw 20,000 pieces of technical documentation into a large language model and press go? Absolutely. Are you going to be satisfied with the result? I doubt it.
Yeah.
So you can use these capabilities to help inform taxonomy, doing entity extraction, analysis of terms, what's been used, way back when versus today, thinking about what kinds of terminology should you use, etc. What particular kinds of technology are now kind of outmoded and you don't want to use, and identifying those. So it's a very good, it can be a really good tool to help inform taxonomy design, but to throw stuff in and push a button and hope for the best, there may be a use case for it if you were doing very large content repositories that essentially you were archiving, but essentially wanted to index and you wanted to, extract some information from it. But for a lot of the AI interactions that you're trying to create, you need structured content, things like taxonomy and metadata, in order to provide context to all the content that you're pumping into the large language model, right? Because it doesn't know the context. Poor little, ChatGPT or whatever you're using, it's trying to figure that context out. Well, what if you'd already designed something where you had a taxonomy and ultimately an ontology to help inform what's happening through knowledge graphs to inform the large language model and the AI application to provide that additional context so you get a more quality result.
So do you actually would train the AI on your taxonomy and your, like you said, your ontology, and then you would feed it the content that's kind of mapped to that taxonomy? Is that how it would work?
Typically, what you would do is you would have this large language model, right? It's going through, it's doing its analysis, but then you apply essentially a knowledge graph that essentially describes relationships between terms. It's sort of like an object-oriented programming, but not really, but it's a rough analogy. So you're looking at the relationships between terms so it can understand what it's looking at, basically. And so typically ontologies have, definitions for all the categories, for any attributes you have. It defines all the relationships between categories, even between values sometimes. And so that provides a good bedrock under which to help the LLM understand what it's looking at when it looks at 20,000 documents or what have you.
Yeah. And that would work if you've got versions of documents, like when you're training your LLM, do companies think about, well, I only want to train on the most recent version, or do they just point it at a file directory and go, here you go, have at it, machine, AI, learn it all, and then we'll figure it out after that?
It depends. So, yeah, some companies will just throw a whole bunch of technical documentation or, you know, in website pages or what have you. Yes, ideally you would just have the most recent version, but particularly for, companies again that have been around a while, they'll have older documentation. Remember when I said, people talked about things differently?
Hmm.
So you could potentially have more problematic content, not in the, what you're talking about. Like one of my clients, for example, still sells products that were designed 30 years ago. They're still making money, they still make it, there's still clients who want it, great. But some of that documentation talks about in terms of master and slave, because this is, computing and engineering, right? We don't use those terms anymore.
Yeah.
And, trying to, and some of the, in one company I worked with some time ago, they had older documentation that talked about in terms of data processing instead of computing. So you get these senses of you need to think carefully about what content you're going to feed it. Otherwise, you will, again, not like the results.
Yeah. It sounds, as I think maybe some people think, and maybe I thought too, you just throw the AI at the documentation, it learns it all, and then it creates whatever, how it works. But I didn't really think about all those kind of details that you have to think about in terms of the wording and things like that.
Right. Or even technologies. So like for example, a client of mine, the aforementioned, still sells things that they designed 30 years ago. That's great, but they don't but the technical documentation around that hasn't changed at all either.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily bad or good? It's really neither. It's just it exists and it supports what's being sold. But also you need to think about, well, we have all these parts that are obsolete. Are we really going to provide, documentation for parts that we don't even sell anymore? No, you probably shouldn't, right? So that's another piece you need to take out, and just sort of figuring out, okay, what would be most relevant to the user base, and also thinking about in terms of your audience, or your customer base, are you focusing on engineers, are you focusing on thought leadership? What's the most appropriate kind of material for the audience that you're trying to target?
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of stuff that a company has to think about.
Yes.
Definitely.
And something, to be fair, some really do think about that and very carefully. They carefully curate their content and, ideally make it all structured because they had to clean up the content anyway,
Yeah.
honestly. So, to get that return on investment, you really have to, and I hate to say it, but you have to do the grunt work in order to make sure that these models can really fully perform.
Yeah.
There's an interesting article in the Harvard Business Review that talks about that a lot of companies aren't really realizing the return on investment on AI initiatives because they're still cleaning up their content.
Mm.
So they're thinking, well, maybe, later, but right now we're still cleaning up. We have so much data cleanup and so much content cleanup to do right now, that you really won't see good results right now.
Yeah. It's probably why AI is moving fast, but it's moving slow at the same time. Companies aren't sure how to use it and work with it yet because they are coming across these things they have to deal with first.
Right. And they also have to look at things like, GDPR and PII and all these other things that they have to be cognizant of, you know, how are we going to, is this going to be used internally? Is this going to be customer facing? We want to make, you have to pay attention to things like ITAR and all these other things to ensure not only the validity, but making sure you're not exposing things you didn't mean to. A lot of these projects expose data issues and content issues that maybe somebody knew about at some point, but forgot about, put under the rug, oh, we'll deal with it later kind of attitude. And it's really shining a light on things that were like, oh yeah, that's right, we were going to clean that up, weren't we? Yeah, I guess we better go do that.
Okay, so talk to me about how you use AI for information retrieval, or not, sorry, how you use a taxonomy when you have an AI like a chat GTP or something for information retrieval. Like, how does that work?
Well, it depends on, again, how you want to, uh, it depends on how you want to provide information to your users. So for example, if you put in a, search phrase, please tell me about ChatGPT or whatever, right? You could use it to essentially run a search query, right, against the content that you've indexed and, want to retrieve. But you could also create a summary or a description of or an answer to your question and say, hey, here, here's the information I found. Here's a quick summary for you. Here are the sources that we have that we use in order to generate this response, and do some additional prompts. Are you also interested in da 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 da? Would you be, and you would click on the next, oh yeah, I was thinking about that too, click, and then it generates another response with another search result set. So you can look at the content itself, but if you wanted a quick summary because, too long, didn't read, you could do that. So that's an interesting application for within the search context.
Is that's similar to, I'm not saying that Microsoft does it that way, but that's like Copilot and Microsoft. They give you that list of articles and lists of additional prompts and things like that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are a lot of things that you can do without AI that look very AI.
Yeah.
It's the bright and sparkly that everybody goes after right now. But sometimes it's sometimes all you need is really good metadata. You
Yeah.
don't need AI, you just need really good metadata. Or some basic machine learning stuff. You don't need the full-blown AI, what you're trying to do. So the big thing is just to be realistic about, who your audience is, what you're trying to do, and what practically do I need to develop in order to answer that need.
Yeah. I kind of think about chatbots when you say things like that. Like, first or second generation chatbots work really good, which is working off a taxonomy and a kind of a structured
Yes.
approach. And now the new ones are, more, let's have a conversation, generative AI. But I think the old ones probably did just as good in some ways to answer your questions.
Yes. Yes. There are, and yeah, and some of them do real well. And honestly, some of them I'm like clicking to close because it's just like you're wasting my time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, how would you leverage AI or ML or taxonomy? I keep getting them reversed as part of an AI project or a machine learning project. Like, what would you say would be the approach to start to use it to get it involved in the project?
Well, first of all, you need a taxonomy, right? You need to design a hierarchy and any associated attributes that represent the content or products for a particular, company or entity, any sort of organization, in order to understand, what you're looking at, so to speak, right? And then you would need to, and ideally you would have that tested. There's a lot of steps involved. You could even use AI to help you inform, what terms you use, but then everything would need to be reviewed with subject matter experts. You need to test it, all that fun stuff, and then once you have it, you can start using that to uh, do automated tagging, tag suggestion. Oh, your article's about this. This is which tags do you want to use, right? Makes it a lot faster for content authors. They don't have to think about it. You can follow simple rules that you've established. You can only have 3 in this particular fast. You can only have 3 terms. You can't select everything. I know your product is wonderful, but you can't use it in every single industry ever. But stuff like that. I've had people try to do that. Like, no. To give everything high priority is to give everything no priority. So that's usually my response to those requests. And then once so you can use it for the auto tagging, you can use it for additional entity extraction to analyze huge content sets to further inform the taxonomy. And then eventually you can create an ontology that, remember, has all those relationships and things like that, and put it into a knowledge graph and you can spit it out as a knowledge graph or as a RDF specialization, and then feed it into the AI application to essentially do assist in, again, providing all that additional context.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how it all kind of works together to create something much better than just scan the document, index the document kind of thing.
Yes. But then, that being said, you still have to pay careful attention to how you're training and tweaking your model.
Yeah.
And making sure you're, adjusting for, making sure the right answer is always the right answer, not drifting off into something else. Depending, because in some industries like healthcare, that's super important. You need the right, right answer. I mean, they're using a lot of AI and imaging and things like that, which makes absolute sense. But in some cases, if you're going to, you don't want somebody to self-diagnose and have it be an unfortunate result because if they're using AI for, that sort of recommendation or anything like that. So it requires a lot of caution in some industries for sure. Just doing it for fun and saying, "Do me a picture of X, Y, and Z." Yeah, that's fun. That's cool. I have a lot of fun with that. But for business practical reasons, it goes back to, what do you really need to do? What do you want to do? Right?
Yeah.
What makes sense?
Yeah. In your experience, are there a lot of companies really definitely on board with getting the taxonomies and the content strategy right before they dive into creating the large language models? Or like what do you find companies are thinking about?
Some are really understand the need for good governance, rigor when it comes to data and content. Others are still kind of thinking that they can just, put it in the blender and, do go. So it really depends on the company and the willingness of upper management to understand that, yes, it's bright and sparkly, but there's a lot happening underneath. It's like the duck on the water, the swan on top of the water. The swan's beautiful, but the swan is going like this really, really fast in order to get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So they have to understand the underlying need to do all the necessary data cleanup and rigor and componentized content and taxonomy in order to make the effort worthwhile and pay for itself, because a lot of companies are paying a lot of money for this kind of technology.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you get into this industry? Like, how did you kind of fall in love with content strategy and everything?
Well, I'm actually a recovering librarian, so I have a master's in library studies from a long time, no, not a long time ago, but for quite some time ago. So when I was going to library school, you had to get special permission from your advisor to get an email address. So, that was many moons ago. But I've always been interested in organizing things. That's honestly what it comes down to. And that's why I'm still in this business.
Dewey Decimal System.
Yes.
I remember that from high school.
Yes. Good old Dewey.
Kids don't know that stuff anymore, right?
Some do, I think. Yeah. Libraries still use it.
Okay. Yeah, some of them do. All right. So usually I ask my guests a final question that they don't know about. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. So
Okay.
yours, you're tricky because you don't have a lot of social media. You're pretty quiet out there. You're
I
probably
am.
heads down
Yes.
doing all your work. But
Yes.
I did come across it where you said that you love gadgets. And that was in your website profile. So
Yes.
I was just curious to know, what is your favorite gadget, and is there one you wish existed that doesn't exist today?
So, okay. My favorite gadget currently, because things change, I have lots of kitchen gadgets. So I have a sous vide machine that essentially allows you to uh, cook any sort of meat or vegetable in a very controlled, in essentially a water bath.
Yeah.
So it's a very uh, overly fancy, overly expensive gadget. The I don't know, gadget which I wish I had. I'll tell you what a piece of functionality I wish I had. So, I play not online games, but I do play games on the, PS4 and stuff like that. And I'd like a Scotch button on the PS4 controller.
So that
So
someone
I
brings you one?
play, yeah, or stops everything. I can take a sip of my scotch, off again. There you go. So that's not really a gadget, but that's a piece of functionality I've always wanted.
I That's funny. I knew someone I knew worked with a colleague who used this sous vide. Said that he had the best steak he ever had out of it, and I just thought, that's so strange. How do you put a steak in a bag in water and it turns out great? But I guess it
It
does.
works. Yeah, it really does. Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca, for being with us today. I really appreciate it. It's good conversation. I learned definitely some stuff about taxonomies and using them with AI that I didn't think you needed to do, but that's good to know.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I love talking about this stuff. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. And you will be presenting at LavaCon conference in Portland, Oregon this October. So
Yes.
probably the
Mhm.
same kind of topic.
Similar.
Yeah,
Yes,
because it's always changing. We always have to keep up with it. It's just all interesting stuff. It's great.
indeed.
Yeah. So, all right. Thank you. And thank you to Ingenix, who is the sponsor of the Content Matters podcast. Ingenix is a leading player in the field of content management and customer experience. Over 20 years in the industry, they've offered innovative digital content and digital experiences and content solutions, to customers worldwide. And you can use Ingenix to build customer portals, taxonomies, technical documentation, websites, mobile apps, all that good stuff. And you can learn more about Ingenix at ingenix.com, where if you go there, you can sign up for our newsletter and learn more about what's coming up in the podcast and everything. And that is it for today. Thank you, everyone, for watching.